Tuesday, Treasurer Jim Chalmers handed down his first budget as federal treasurer. Now, some are going to claim he hasn't done enough. Others will assert, given the current global economic challenges, he's delivered a responsible budget. However, one of the more disturbing items of the budget is the expected sharp rise in energy prices. Chalmers has flagged an aggressive regulatory crackdown in the energy markets after the budget revealed households would be whacked with a 56% increase in power bills over the next 2 years, leaving Labor's promise to cut electricity bills by $275 now nothing more than a memory. With gas and electricity, it's going to rise sharply as the cost is passed on to households, with power bills expected to rise 20% later this year and a further 30% in 23-24. Well, the Treasurer has laid the blame at pain at the feet of Russian President Vladimir Putin and his invasion of Ukraine. And he's saying that it's driven the global energy prices to record levels since February. Now, whether that's a fair assertion or not, that's what we're going to discuss today on The Informed. So joining us is Ryan Smith, Shadow Minister for Planning in Victoria, Mario Beeks, Security Consultant and author of Blood-Soaked Soil and the soon-to-be-released What is the Price of Freedom, Caroline Counsell, Australia's leading law expert, and Sherelle Ainsley, the independent candidate for Nepean, and of course, Ian Cook, the independent candidate for the seat of Mulgrave. Welcome, team.
G'day.
Morning.
Now, Ryan, let's kick off with you as the opposition. How do you feel that it's been not only characterised, but handled by Labor?
Well, I think this talk about energy bills going down prior to the election, it's clearly been seen now as just, a lie, basically a complete sham. I don't think the conditions have changed markedly since the government was elected 5 months ago. So those conditions that were in place before the election remain. The assessment that the then opposition, the then Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers made back before that federal election, all those circumstances still remain. So I think it was just a campaign slogan to put out there for the people. They knew that cost of living pressures were a huge issue, and they put out that they could fix them. And clearly, just 5 months later, we're shown very clearly that it was all a lie.
Now, Mario, you're quite across the Ukrainian war. Was it a reasonable expectation if the government thought that it wouldn't impact or that it would be resolved by now?
Look, I know it's a domino effect with the wheat and the corn from Ukraine. I mean, the 10% missing for the market, so it's like a domino effect across the globe. But I don't see justification in energy. And explain to me, as a 5 years old, if they're driving all this green energy in the future with electric cars and everything else, with the rising prices of electricity and energy, how that's going to be affordable? I think that was entirely avoidable. And blaming just a war in Ukraine, 20,000 kilometers far away from Australia, I think it's unjustifiable at all.
Yeah, it was just a convenient excuse.
Let's go blame everything war in Ukraine. I mean, we have the currently 135 local wars across the globe. But Ukraine war, it's West supporting, but how this affecting energy in Australia, it doesn't make a sense for me whatsoever. It doesn't make a sense. Our logistics and everything else it's flawless. We have the natural resources in Australia, but yet we're driving this energy. But blaming the previous government, as a treasurer says, 10 years of the bad governance, now increasing prices, and easy to say 55% is tremendous. And I can see in my business. We got the invoice the other day. It's just, I can't even mention the figure what we got it. It's 3 times more, which means we're going to work for electricity only.
Sherelle, what are you hearing from your constituents as far as electricity prices go? Because you've got a wide variance between your upper and lower socioeconomics down in Nepean, don't you?
Yeah, it's going to be really hard for people down in Nepean. So we've got a lot of an older population down here. So let's think about summer when it becomes really, really hot. They're going to have to choose between having air conditioning on and also, or are they going to be able to afford to pay these bills? And then we've got the young families, a very young family growing population. And again, they're going to struggle to be able to keep paying these high electricity bills and keep kids warm, etc. And let's not forget that these electricity prices going up will also affect us when we go to the shops, because the supermarkets The delivery chains, their costs are all going up, and we're going to feel it when we go to the supermarket. So it's costs rising everywhere. And I'm really worried for everyone in Nepean on how they're going to survive going forward.
And Caroline, with your area in family law, we know what stress on the family budget does as far as exacerbate the family situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And for new parents, I've actually seen this, obviously at the coalface, unable to air condition their homes. Although I think with El Nino at the moment, it's going to be a case of heating the homes. I've actually seen families fall apart. I've seen the Department of Health and Human Services turn up at the doorstep. I've seen families being torn apart. It has a real and visceral effect on families when they cannot turn the lights on, turn the air conditioning or heating on. It really impacts adversely on them.
And Ian, your community as well in Mulgrave, there's a lot of food businesses down there. The cost of running those refrigerations and ovens, they're sky high already at the moment. What will this do to them?
Yeah, well, this will make it worse. And actually, from people in small businesses, the big theme in terms of costs is that if you take, it's like a double whammy. They're going to get clobbered with electricity prices, but they're all expecting to be clobbered by land tax. And most of them don't own properties. It's the landlords passing on the increases in land tax by the Victorian government. And they're just saying all that's going to happen is they'll put their prices up. They'll either stay in business or go broke. And there's a genuine fear about what's going on. And as Sherelle was saying down in, Mulgrove's probably a bit like Nepean. There are a lot of older people that live in this electorate that have, brought their families up, grown up, and now retired in it. They're on fixed incomes. And it also brings into light the fact that Australia has huge resources when it comes to natural gas, and it's supposedly one of the cleaner things we can generate power from. And as I was a kid growing up, we were told that one of the reasons Victoria had wonderful manufacturing is that we had this, 300 years of coal that was going to keep manufacturing in cheap power forever. And now we have to have, this is, if you like, is giving us a little bit of a window. This is why we have to now have a sensible conversation around all the climate change and stopping emissions, etc. Because it might be someone's budget today, but tomorrow, what happens when there's a blackout at the Royal Melbourne Hospital? Who dies?
And that exactly happened down here in Nepean over summer. We can't hold surgeries in Rosebud Hospital because it's so substandard at the moment. But I was talking to a nurse off the record, and they're literally walking out in between patients and pulling their masks off, their PPE off, and the sweat is pouring out because the electricity, the air conditioning isn't working. So that's suboptimal for the nurses, but what is it doing to our patients that are actually in these hospitals as well?
Can I just add something to this one? I'm talking a lot to my counterparts in Europe and my family over there, and they're supposed to already start the heating season, particularly in Europe. It's been moved another couple of days, right? And then prolonging. But not only that one, they try to understand if we have all this gas and the electricity, stored, why we have these sort of restrictions. But what worries me in Australia, now nobody talks about solutions for politicians. Nobody talks about solutions. The government says we're going to increase 55% electricity bill, but nobody talks about solutions as you always say. And I think myself, would that lead us actually in the destruction of the small businesses, even the hospitals and everything else? So what's the solution in all this? If you say that next 2 years, price is going to go higher, that's mean next 2 years is going to be bad. So what's the solution for the third year? That's what worries me. Nobody talks about solution.
Well, all governments say that there's solutions that they're putting forward, renewable energy generators. I mean, every time they talk about power, they talk about it being the solution. Andrews spoke last week about bringing back the SEC, a 25, 30-year-old model, and saying that's going to bring down prices. I mean, it's just every single time this issue is raised by politicians, every single time they put a new policy direction in place, it's apparently going to bring down power bills. But no one's looking at their bills saying, wow, we've had just this drop. So it's even worse, Mario. They actually are posing solutions, but they're not real solutions. They're just spin.
Ryan, I agree. The desperate attempt to try and control this rollicking ride that we are all suffering from by even mentioning the SEC, that was laughable in my opinion. That's a real grasp at straws.
Yeah.
Why aren't we talking about nuclear?
Well, we can, and that's, I don't disagree with you, Sherelle. I think probably we need to. I mean, it's a federal issue though. Before they have to put the legislation in place to let the states actually move down that path. But the short-term problem we've got, the conversation will move to alternate forms of energy when, as the market operator, the energy market operators forecast, the next 2 years we're going to have a lot more blackouts. The conversation will move when the average Victorian or Australian more broadly actually sees that there is, they wear the pain of those blackouts, they wear the pain of those increased costs. I feel like Australians have to feel the pain before they actually challenge the status quo about renewable energy being the panacea for all our problems.
And I think that might be sooner rather than later.
I agree.
The pain is really coming, and I think this summer is really going to hit Victorians really hard.
Yeah, I agree.
And there has to be greater collaboration, if you will, between the private enterprise and government. It can't all fall on government's shoulders, but the way in which we think is so short term. So I just want to pick up on the theme that we don't get enough momentum to affect lasting and sustainable change, because we're constantly changing who's at the top of the pyramid, who then dictates or rather sets the scene. And I don't think private enterprise has been included appropriately in government thinking.
That's probably true. There's a clear difference in the state election. We're going to remain with gas. The government says they're going to phase it out as quickly as they can. Now, if anyone, this is one of the issues of the election. If you want to have, still reasonably cheap, reliable energy, then you vote for us. If you want to have a complete reliance on wind and solar, you vote for the other people. And the associated pain that comes with both of those different approaches to energy supply, then you have to make a choice as a Victorian. But we've also said, sorry, just to pick up on what Carolyn said, we've also said in looking to see what the energy mix is going forward, that we will work with the commercial sector to make sure that we can deliver. And because a lot of, look at the likes of AGL, they want to get out of coal, that's fine, that's their commercial decision. But they still want to make money as an energy provider. So I'd rather the government sits down and says, okay, you want to go down this path that appears maybe not a majority, but a large portion of the country or the state wants you to go that way too. How are we going to do that together? And because, I think we can all agree that politicians are far from having all the answers.
Ron, do you think that Chalmers and the Prime Minister have lost Dan Andrews' number? He's out spruiking that he's got the solution to make energy cheaper, that he will do it, vote him in, and energy prices will come down. And it's at direct odds with what the Federal Treasurer has just said, 56% increase over the next couple of years.
Don't forget these two men are very, very close friends over many decades. Okay, they won't challenge each other at all. Albanese will say that black is white. Andrews will say white is black. They'll speak at odds all the time, but never challenge each other. That's how it's going to be. If Andrews gets in, that's how it's going to be for the next 3 years.
Yeah, and I'd like everyone to think that. Remember back when I grew up with the SEC and the PMG. In fact, my dad worked for them. But what they're asking us is to trust the mob to run the electricity, that can't keep the roads in a fit state, can't run the hospitals, and for goodness sakes, the same government that instigated the Mikey ticket debacle, and somehow they're going to magically run an efficient, productive electricity company with our
Mo-
superannuation, our
More-
retirement going
More
into
recently, just last week, Homes Victoria, which was an agency set up to deliver public housing, set up just 2 years ago, reported last week as being insolvent. I mean, for goodness sake.
Yeah. Michael, but Michael, the example that I'm about to give you is Community Chef. So anybody who wants it, we can step through just exactly when Daniel Andrews invests in a government-run enterprise, how much money he loses. Now, they put the money up, they got it going. It was touted to bring down the price of meals to the elderly, a better quality, better everything. It was poorer quality, and it was 35% more expensive than the private sector. And I have all the figures to prove it, because we have all their board papers, we have all their financials. That's how the Andrews government runs a business.
Yeah, and the way they award their contracts, let's not forget the hotel security firm. I think they went belly up. The Western people entrusted with the Western Roads upgrade, they went belly up, owing millions to subcontractors. Government's job is to govern, not to be in private enterprise.
Michael, the security firm, there was no probity, there was no tender, and the guy that won it was a bankrupt.
This is the problem. I mean, as Ian knows full well, the government, when they take over these things, they also want to get rid of their competition. So there's no measure, there's no yardstick to say, are we doing a good job or not? So, whether it's in an underhanded fashion in the way that Ian's experienced, or whether it's just telling energy companies, we don't want you here anymore, we're taking over, and forcing them out. They not only they want to take over, not only are they going to be run badly, but they also want to make sure there's no yardstick to be measured against.
And this is why I'm excited to be running as an independent, because I feel like a lot of decisions being made, across the country, in our state and across the country, are not always based on merit. It's based on how they can get re-elected or what their buddies want, and it's all about them. When we are as an independent, I'm excited because I can actually look at every single bit of legislation that's put to me and evaluate it based on how it affects my Nepean constituents. And I think, Ian and Michael, I think you'd probably agree with me that basing legislative decisions on merit rather than these side issues is the way that the state needs to move forward.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say to that is sometimes you're going to get legislation that doesn't affect your area and you've got no input on how it affects other areas. Many times you're going to get legislation that doesn't affect your area.
Ryan,
but it is going to affect, because it will actually take money from our area, or it will ultimately affect the whole state. We don't look at the state in isolation of just an electorate, but we have to also factor in how it will affect. So even what's happening up in Michael's area will affect the power lines and how that's getting paid and who's funding that does affect us, because we need to either support that or not support it, and we're going to bear some of the cost of that. So I do think decisions across the state do affect people in Nepean, whether it's a decision directly for this local area or not.
You may be right. I'm only making my comments based on 16 years of experience, so you may be right.
Well, see, I'm a huge fan of the Liberals' education policy at the moment. Love it. Brilliant. So, I jumped straight on that. The Labor have actually, I can't think of anything good, but if they actually came up with something good, I'm sure I would support it based on its merit. I wouldn't be reluctant, just because, even a broken clock is wrong twice a day. So, if they struck gold, I would jump on it. So that's why I think independents are a good thing.
Just so long as we don't have a divided parliament. I mean, there's nothing worse than disunity. I'm a big believer in, the major parties, but the major parties have to be held to account. And there is something very crook in Tullarook people in Tullarook, in terms of what is happening at the coalface of government, and the fact that the voting populace, have lost faith. Mario, you often talk about the Victorian government being akin to Eastern Bloc countries and communist countries. I was listening to this conversation today, thinking about what happened to Ian and his journey, thinking about the level of corruption. apropos of nothing, I've recently watched a show about the making of The Godfather and the mafia. I'll say no more.
Yeah.
Look,
Yeah.
I think that you guys in Victoria, like, not just Victoria, for me personally, I'm 22 years in Australia. It wasn't never my choice to come to Australia. I've been sent, but the day I landed in Australia, I fall in love with this country, particularly how people are nice. You can approach the police officer, no drama. Everything is just so beautiful. The last 2 years, actually, politicians, the majority of politicians, like I would say, like not just the Labor, but Liberals as well, they show the true colors. And I can't distance myself from some teachings, in school about communism. We have these compulsory subjects, and one of them it is like that Thomas More. It's a book called Utopia, where they say always told us people are sheep, and they're gonna follow the herd's gonna follow if you put them into herd. And I can understand Victoria people have just been compressed into herd and ever just following very few politicians who don't have even any background in politics, have any background in science or medicine, but yet they're giving us these big statements and people following. That's a beyond communism.
Short-term solutions, Ryan, like what can we do to ease the pain that we're all going to feel? I understand like we're facing real budgetary problems, not here in Victoria, because billions of dollars of promises being made each week for, we're already $167 billion in debt. But what short-term solutions can we do for this? Is there some sort of lever that either the state or the federal government could and should pull?
Energy or more broadly?
Just mainly with the energy.
Oh, right. We do have a policy announcement coming up that I'm not at liberty to talk about now that will have a material impact, I believe. But more broadly, look, just the very fact that we're keen to explore and develop our gas reserves, make sure that the gas keeps flowing is a big part of making sure we have that reliable energy that is, as you rightly said, as a fossil fuel cheap to get into the market. We need to make sure that this is the other thing, the energy that is out there with the renewables in the Western District, they actually can generate more energy than is being put through the transmission lines. The transmission lines are not fit for purpose. And as you know, Michael, from your area, there is that project, the manner in which the project's being rolled out is not something that they have a social license for. But that aside, for the moment, there has been very little money spent on making sure that transmission infrastructure is in place. So we're going to make sure the transmission infrastructure is put in place so that the energy that is being generated by those big projects out in the Western District can actually get to Melbourne. And I think that's an important part of it too.
Ryan, they built all these big, wonderful wind turbines.
Yeah.
Didn't think about how they were going to plug them in.
Well, between the wind turbines and the solar in the Western District, I think we're getting, I think the number's 37% only can get through back to Melbourne. So the capacity is higher, but what they're actually being able to transmit is ridiculous because, poles and wires don't attract a shiny, glossy press release like a new wind turbine does. So it's crazy. They've just focused on one aspect of energy supply, and that's the generation without thought to transmission or distribution.
Just ridiculous. And this is the mob that's saying we're going to spend your superannuation, your future retirement funds on running a company. You built these things and you didn't think, where are we going to plug them in? Really?
Yeah. And the government says that they're 51% of the profits that they make are going to be put back in the system. And they say the superannuation funds are going to take the other 49%. So what do you think the superannuation funds focus is going to be? Is it going to be on generating returns for their members or keeping energy prices down? Well, actually legislated they have to maximise returns for their members. So, one partner in this deal that the Premier is putting forward actually needs to make as much money as they possibly can.
Yeah, otherwise it's actually legislated, as you said, a director's responsibility is directly to his shareholders, not to ESG outputs, not to
energy consumers.
Yeah. So
no one's talking about that. I tried to raise it on one of the mainstream media outlets earlier this week, but it sort of didn't get picked up.
And from a legal perspective, Michael, of course, these are trusts. So as trustees of super funds, they have a fiduciary duty that's akin to that of a director to shareholders, but in fact, if anything, more so than a director. So it's governed by legislation that they cannot breach, also governed by the principles relating to the management of trusts.
Could you imagine how much better off we'd be if the government had that same fiduciary trust with our taxes, where, you know, they were held responsible? How do we feel about a sovereign wealth fund like they have in Norway?
Yes, please. You know, when we were riding high in relation to resources, that was the time to create that level of wealth as they did in Norway. It again, short-term thinking, no long-term thinking. This is so frustrating for us as a country. I'm about to sound like Donald Trump and talk about being great again, because this really gives me the pip that we had that golden opportunity and it was predominantly squandered. Same with stamp duty, riding high on the hog of stamp duty. And look what they've done. Look what the Labor government in this state's done since.
Well, it was, you know, not to blow the trumpet on the Liberal Party, but it was Costello who said, let's get the Future Fund going when things were going well. And there was a change of government shortly after that. And the Future Fund, which had 20 billion put in it, was raided during the GFC.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank goodness that that fund was there to get us through the GFC. I think we have it backwards, especially in Victoria, where it's spend like a drunken sailor with someone else's credit card when times are tough. And
well, they're quite open. I mean, there's a time when, you know, an opposition would say, oh, the government's, you know, pushing the bill out to our grandchildren. The government would say, oh, no, we're not doing that. Now, Tim Pallas is quite open. You know, I'm building infrastructure and it's just right that your kids and grandkids should pay for it. They're going to use it. So much for leaving places better than you found them. We'll build stuff for you, but you're going to pay for it down the track. I mean, that language is just so bad in so many ways.
But we're also building infrastructure that may not even be needed with the changing demographics of the state. We've seen what's happened to the city now, where we haven't come back. We've seen the tree change and the sea change that's happened, that's put so much pressure on my electorate of Eureka, where we're bursting at the seams. And in my town of Bacchus Marsh, there's nowhere where you can even buy a pair of men's jocks, and I need them. Like, we don't have a bus service to the town where you do have it. We have, you know, public transport that just entrenches and exacerbates disadvantage. We've got two secondary schools, no TAFE. You know, the nearest TAFE is 34 kilometres away and, you know, over an hour and a half by public transport. So, you know, what hope do we have with building stuff that's going to be out in 2050 when, you know,
there's so many areas. Shirell's got exactly the same problems down in the P, and the just distance from those sort of services. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's amazing though. Frankston, same distance from Melbourne as Bacchus Marsh, where I live. They've got at least got an electrified train system that, you know, has a metro timetable, and not us.
Yeah, but you got to remember the train line stops at Frankston, and we are 50 kilometres down the way from that. Yeah. We've got some bus services, and there are no bus, like the bus services are completely, there's not enough services. So one person was saying that in between they have 6 services a day. 6, that's just it. And even if you got on that train and got to Frankston, the train I think finishes around midnight, and the last bus service is an hour before. Oh. So you can't even get down to the area on public transport at all.
Down in Sunbury, there's no bus from the station after 8:26.
Oh my God, is this possible? This is Australia. I'm seriously.
No, tell me about it.
I mean, like, well, this is not Croatia. Seriously, we're just.
And that's the other thing. Roads are a big one. Sorry, we've got off topic, but roads are a huge one in my electorate, with that Western freeway failing, and and that's why I want people to realise, when Dan Andrews is up touting, we've removed 67 level crossings. Each one of those level crossings at a cost of around $170 million. That's an entire year's road maintenance budget for the entire state. So he spent 67 years of road maintenance budget removing metro, nearly all of them are metro level rail crossings, that by their data saves between 3 and 10 minutes on your morning or evening commute while we risk our lives driving on goat tracks.
Which also explains, Michael, why we only have one lane of the Calder open for stretches at a time in the Macedon Ranges area, constantly having to be repaired, not being repaired, but my God, they're producing witches' hats at an enormous rate. So they're able to put those out on the roads. They're able to send workers to put the witches' hats there and maintain the witches' hats, but not maintain the roads. Don't get me started.
Full of fossil fuels, Caroline. Those witches' hats, those plastics.
If you look at,
don't forget that we've now got the public transport not working. We've got to drive in our cars because we don't have the services, yet our cars are getting damaged. So that's just another cost of living pressure where people are having to go and get their cars fixed on a regular basis because of potholes, bad roads, etc. So, and the extra petrol, as Caroline was saying, just with those one lane roads.
you can look at examples around the world, places like Detroit, cities in South America. The first sign that a government has run out of money is when the roads start deteriorating and the graffiti gets worse. The government has no money to do the basic maintenance.
And Andrew's announcement, we're having a blitz. We're going to mow the lawns and get rid of the graffiti on the side of the road. You're kidding. Like, that's an announcement. Shouldn't that be like?
That's business as usual.
All right, we've got to wind it up there, folks. So, Sherelle, biggest issue for you this week in your electorate?
I think it'll be the hospitals. The hospital down here is a really, really big. I know the Liberal Party have committed a lot of money. Labor have come out and said that, well, the Labor candidate down here has said that he will fully support it. It's his number one priority. But I think more and more people down here are really noticing how struggling or how dangerous really it is because we don't have that basic service that we need.
Yeah. And Ryan, in your leafy suburb of Warrandyte, where
the
hugely popular?
The unprompted message I get from everyone I speak to is how much they want this guy out. You know, we are in a great area. It's not without its problems in terms of you know, need, but the overarching thing that I get back unprompted is they cannot stand this man and they want him gone.
Ian, I would sort of guess you might be hearing that as well, but what's the other issue?
No. Okay, so yes, Ryan's absolutely right. That's the number one comment I get is please win. Please, let's get rid of this guy. So that is the number one. The next one in line is, surprisingly, is land tax. I mean, I think of it as an issue, but I'm surprised how many people realise the flow-on effect of what they're doing.
Yep.
Yep. The tax itself is one of those insidious taxes that people like Andrews put up and say, hey, this will only affect rich people. And it's just a lie, a complete lie. Can I also say that the other thing that has come up a few times, this has come up from Labor voters, they say they're Labor voters, they're not Dan Andrews voters. There is a recognition by, I've got to say, about a dozen people out of hundreds that I have been talking to recently, about a dozen have said to me that he doesn't represent their Labor Party, that he is damaging what they see as their great Labor Party.
Yeah.
Well, how funny is this? Our Labor candidate down here is producing materials and not even putting the Labor logo on it. So they're actually, he's what, I guess, not proud to be part of Labor, I guess.
Well, I heard feedback down in the P and Sherelle that as he's door knocking and people say they don't like Dan, Chris Brain saying, I don't either.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And Caroline, we're coming up to a busy time of year for your practice with Christmas coming on. Always gets worse, doesn't it?
It does indeed. I used to publish, 10 points for surviving Christmas as families, even if you're separating or have separated. That's always interesting. But from my perspective, I'm with Sherelle just in terms of lack of hospitals in this area. So for Christmas, I'm going to buy my husband and me a defibrillator because God knows you can't rely on the ambulance service and you sure as hell can't rely on the hospitals.
And I'm going to throw one in there. That's a shocking present. and Mario, let's get on with
stop, Michael.
Caroline. Caroline.
Yes.
I already own one.
It's a good thought.
Yeah.
You
and-
know what? And the fully automated ones are so clever, they pretty much take the place of a paramedic.
Wow. Okay. Send me the brand name.
Oh no,
Yeah.
don't let Dan Andrews hear about that. He'll be hiring 17,000 automatic defibrillators to get rid of paramedics. And Mario, the new book, what can you tell us about it? Price of Freedom.
Thank you. Look, it's the aim of the book. It is that people know that, you know, it's simple terms. Freedom doesn't come for free, and somebody needs to fight for it, and it's a highest price. And in my book, it's just as I elaborated, and I want to say thank you, Michael, for the putting the forwards and acknowledgement in my book. The war itself, it's a horror. Sorry, it's a hell. Hell is a war is a hell. But what I witnessed during the war, it's not just the war itself, but it was organized crime, privatization, and, you know, politicians actually making themselves richer. And once the war was finished, you know, the thing it is, you know, thank you, everybody, you know, get out of the site and, you know, let's go continue the stealing from the government, from the people. That's the book about it. I mean, not just the war, but when you see behind what's happening, it was a more
Great.
horrible.
All right, team, we'll adjourn until we reconvene next week. And Sherelle, Ian, and Ryan, hopefully we'll see you all on the crossbenches. And good luck to everyone.
Yeah, good luck, everyone.
Take
See you
care.
later.
Thank you.
Bye.